Well, that was a very peculiar mission in several ways. From the outset, that very day when we taxied out to begin to get in the queue for takeoff, our airplane, which we had flown 15 missions in, I should say 13 missions, lost hydraulic pressure. So we had to shut it down and request a substitute airplane. Our airplane had never been painted, but it was called Heavenly Body. So we got a substitute airplane, and they brought it out to us just quickly, and we were able to get off the ground with the rest of the planes and go on up and get into formation to head over the channel. But that airplane was from the 367th Squadron. So from that time on, with the records and the recorded information that the Air Corps had, people are confused. Were we with the 367th or 369th? Our airplane with 367th. The name of that airplane was Duration Plus. And only after all this happened did we kind of understand what that implication was. Duration Plus was a very common phrase used during that period of time, because you'd go into the Army Air Corps, the Army Navy, or anything for the duration plus 6 months. And so everything seemed to be duration plus whenever you went into service. And that's what this name of this airplane was. Well, we got within, maybe an hour of the target that day, and everything was going fine. But suddenly, we lost power in one engine, and we had to feather that engine. But we were still able to keep up with the formation. That wasn't any problem. Just as we got to the target, almost simultaneously, we lost power in a second engine, and I had asked the co-pilot to feather that engine. Well, there wasn't time from that request to the fact that we had been hit by a piece of flak. I did not know why. What happened later was due to flak. This all came later, but we were hit without doubt with some piece of flak, maybe a very small piece, but hot as a red piece of metal, and coming in the right side of the fuselage, just ahead of the instrument panel. But the first we knew, was not that we heard anything or felt anything, but it was just the fact that just immediately we had a blowtorch of a fire right ahead of the instrument panel on the right side of the fuselage. And later, in looking at other B-17s, it seemed to me that there was an oxygen line and an oil line, maybe hydraulic oil, headed for the instrument panel. And that was what was severed, with oil spewing out and oxygen spraying on it with this red-hot piece of flak. But it just started immediately like a blowtorch of a fire. And it was very obvious in the position of this fire and the intensity of the fire, it was not going to be put out, I thought. So I gave the order to bail out just right away. We were just on the IP. I don't think I made that clear, that we were on the IP, we were ready to drop our bombs when the time came. We didn't get to that point. We had this fire, and with that, as soon as that fire hit us, why, we pulled out of formation and pulled back on the throttles all the way, because we were at 29,500 feet. And one thing was obvious, that we needed to get down to a lower altitude quickly. And so we were just literally in a dive to a lower altitude. And this fire was so intense that, as I said, I just gave the order to bail out just almost within seconds after observing the fire we had. The guys in back, from the radio operator on back, went out just almost right away, and it was a little unfortunate because they landed fairly close to the target. I was calling to bail out when we were on the bombing run, not yet at bombs away. So they landed relatively close to the target, and the tail gunner, Richard Edwards, had an encounter with apparently one of the laborers in that plant. This was probably around noon. And this guy was there with a lunch bucket, one of these lunch buckets about that long, a foot or so, with a rounded top with a handle on the top, usually a leather handle as they used to make them in the United States. Well, he took that lunch bucket and just beat the tail gunner unmercifully and cut his forehead and over his eye. So he was pretty well beat up. The other guys, I should say that when I gave the order to bail out, that the co-pilot just stayed in his seat and just looking forward, didn't make a move. So I hit him on the shoulder. You can't talk out loud except through the intercom. Hit him on the shoulder and motioned go, and he did. He then got up and went out. Well, the top turret gunner didn't bail out when I gave the order. He was trying to put out that fire, and he did his very best to contain it, to reduce it all the time that remained there. But Jerry Johnson, the co-pilot, went up to the front then, and the navigator and bombardier had the front hatch open. So when we got ready to go, it seemed to be the time for Bump and I to bail out. We started for the front, and those three guys were sitting around the open hatch up in front. I motioned for him to go, and the navigator was facing me, and he just put his hands up and no, and very emphatically. The co-pilot had his back to me, so I couldn't see what was going on with him. The bombardier was to the left, facing the co-pilot. So something was wrong up there, and there was not time to discuss it for seconds even. And so I went back to the flight deck and tried to stabilize the airplane, because we were in one steep dive, very steep dive, and with the throttles clear back. And the last I saw was 290 miles per hour on the airspeed indicator. Whether it was operating properly, I don't know. It was a very steep dive, and I needed to stabilize the airplane if I could. But the fire had come around the instrument panel and was now engulfing the cockpit itself. And all I could do was stand behind the pilot's seat and reach out with an arm and kind of turn away from the fire. And in the process of doing that, I got burned on this wrist, between the cuffs, I guess, and this side of my face and down here and my neck along there. And then when just I suppose seconds later, it just, all this couldn't have been anywhere near the time it seemed to be. We started to go out again, and the fire was just engulfing the front part of the fuselage, down where the hatch was. We couldn't even see anything but raging fire. So we couldn't go out that way. And Gerald Bump and I went out the Bombay because of that. We had to go out that way or forget it. We were all hoping those guys were out and really didn't know for sure. But we went out, and the two of us landed very close to a Luftwaffe training school at the town of Halle. I call it Halle because it's spelled Halle. I've heard later that it's pronounced Hallach in German. I can't do it quite the way they would do it. It was not a real low fall because there was time in there, and during this time, when I was coming down my chute, I could hear a Focke-Wulf 190. I could tell by the engine noise that's what it was, and that plane was kind of circling, and I just had been conscious and then unconscious, just fading away from lack of oxygen and all this, burns and the whole works. But I wondered, is he going to dump my chute, or is he going to shoot me down, shoot me out of the parachute? Well, later the logic said that this plane was from that Luftwaffe school, and probably he was calling back there to tell them where the top turret gunner and I were coming down, so they'd know where to go to intercept us on the ground. And when we got on the ground, those guys from the Luftwaffe school were just rushing out there by the dozens. And the reason for that big crunch of people was they wanted the souvenirs out of our escape kits. And in those escape kits, we had about $1,500 in German money, as I understand it. And nobody has disagreed with that I've talked to since then. We had maps, they're cloth maps of almost all of Europe that were to be used in for the purpose of evading and getting back to friendly territories. And we had a chocolate bar in there, big, heavy D-bar, we called it. Very high in nutrition and delicious too. Well, they wanted that, and they wanted my .45 caliber pistol. And they just kept rolling me over and over, and I was just out most of that time, just being rolled over. But I remember that part of it. My back was sore and gave me trouble. In fact, it gave me trouble in later years. Whether they were connected, I don't know. But the tail gunner, or the top turret gunner, either broke his ankle or had a very strenuous, a very rough sprain of the ankle, because he was in pretty bad shape when he hit the ground. But we must have been very close together. All I can tell you is what I recall and what I saw, and I guess probably didn't see. Well, the very next thing I remember after being on the ground was that I thought I heard a horse walking, or I could hear these footsteps. And I opened my eyes, and I must have been leaning over the back of this little donkey. Where it came from, I have no idea. But when I opened my eyes, I was looking right in the eye of that little donkey. And I just couldn't figure out how this had happened. But then I didn't know anything until they took me, I suppose, with the donkey to this little car to take me to the jail in Holly. They took both of us to the jail and put us in the same cell. But they put me in this little old car. I remember hearing it too, like I did the 190, but I'd never heard anything like that before, and in a car engine. And it was years and years later when we began to import Volkswagens in the United States. That's what I heard that day. That was a Volkswagen. They had a sound all their own. We both wound up in the jail there at Holly, and very soon after we got there, a medic came over from that Luftwaffe school, and he bandaged up my top turret gunner's ankle, which makes me think it was probably a very bad sprain, because he never had any problem with it after that. But he got it all bandaged up, and then he started on my burns and bandaged up all this stuff, the wrist, the face, the neck, and all. Then, after, I'm sure it was probably the very next day, we were taken to Frankfurt, the Dulag Luft, the interrogation center.